Creative people, I think, are forged, and I think that they are made. Creativity is not in your mind. I think creativity is in your body. As a creative person, you're already sensitive to those energies around you. You already have this ability to see the world in just like a slightly different way. But if you're somebody who's like, my gut feelings are off lately, and like you don't trust your gut, it's because that connection somewhere between your brain and your body has been pruned a little bit. You can sleep stressed for decades. The nervous system is our remote control in our life. It's the remote control in our world. It is what helps us see and experience the world, but also it's what helps regulate how we are coping in the world. Everything has a season. And so if we can't be in flow state 24/7, it's impossible. And we can't be outputting all the time. Burnout becomes this self-consuming construct of our own selves because we're trying to control an outcome. And the outcome we're trying to control is perfection. And there's no such thing. If you don't have the ability to regulate yourself when there's a stressor around, you tend to go towards poor coping mechanisms. And that's yelling, screaming, isolating, drugs, alcohol, sex, right? Like any sort of vice. And so you could say being a creative is a coping mechanism.
Welcome to the Light Pod, built by Light Eye, the #1 podcast when it comes to thought-provoking and inspirational conversations around the people, the process, and the product of design, all with a little love for light along the way. I'm your host, Sam Corbel, and today we welcome Shawna Bigby-Davis to the podcast studio to have a conversation on your own creative mind, what it means to maintain and manage that, and ultimately how it can benefit your mental health. This conversation is made possible thanks to our partner, Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale creates luminaires that go beyond expectations in healthcare environments, focusing on the people and well-being, not just spaces or treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's impact and you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. Now let's get to know our guests a little bit more. Shawna is a former creative brand agency owner who turned her health journey into a mission. After battling multiple autoimmune diseases, she reinvented herself and became a certified nervous system coach, specializing in trauma, somatics, and nutrition. Shawna now helps men and women reclaim their well-being through her health coaching programs at Your Daily. Shawna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It's certainly an exciting time for what I would say me and everybody who's ever listened to the Light Pod. We've never done anything peripherally important like this in terms of, having conversations in a holistic way. But I think it makes a lot of sense when you look at design today, when you look at the built environment, we're all about human-centric environments. We're all about, sustainable solutions and approaches. And we need to be that way in life too. For ourselves, for not only what we do professionally, but personally, we have an opportunity to explore what that creative mind means for all the creatives out there. It's never perfect. There's always something you can do better. Sometimes that can definitely push you into the wee hours of the day. Not necessarily because you're being creative, but because you were for 4 hours earlier and now you got to get done what you got to get done.
I love being with creative people because the energy and the vitality that comes off of creative people is exciting to me. And so I worked in advertising for 20 years. I worked in branding and marketing and big boy advertising. And that was like doing television commercials and the outside world of billboards and whatnot. And it ate me alive. When I would go to doctors, they would tell me that you're just stressing out, go do some OMS, you're fine. And pretty soon I was in and out of ERs, I was in and out of urgent care centers, specialists, you name it. And nobody knew what was wrong with me. And so I made this really important decision, which was to leave the creative space, to sell my studio and to go on a health journey. When we are creative people, we tend to give and give and give and give. And we rarely take time to fill up our cup. If we do fill up our cup, we're filling it up because we've got to deliver to somebody else, or we've got to create for somebody else. Especially for those of us who are like in a creative industry where we are working and receiving money for our creative space, right? So when we're constantly giving, 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 and we're not filling up our cup, we tend to get depleted. And I can go into more on that, especially as it revolves around the 3 stages of stress. The nervous system is our remote control in our life. It's the remote control in our world. It is what helps us see and experience the world, but also it's what helps regulate how we are coping in the world, how we are eating food, how we are digesting food, how we are relating to one another. And so when we have the power of our nervous system in our hands and we are actually like paying attention to our nervous system, that's when everything starts to click into place.
When you look at the creative mind, the desire to give, to show up and be present for everything around you, where does that come from in our well-being as human beings?
Creative people, I think, are forged, and I think that they are made. So creative people, I think there's that nature versus nurture, right? So nature, you are born creative. You are born more empathetic. You're born more open to sensing the world around you and experiencing it, and then being able to repeat that back in whatever form, of whatever creative form that you have. And so I think creative people are just who they are. But also, I believe that creative people are forged, and they are forged by their experiences. So this is the nurture version, right? So when we are in our youth and we were experiencing the world through our parents are the sun, moon, and stars for us. They dictate everything. And then from 0 to 7, we don't have logic. Logic doesn't come online for us until 7 to 9. For girls, it's around 7. For boys, it's around 8 or 9. So we don't have logic between 0 to 7. So we just experience the world through emotions and our emotional center. And our parents are the filter for that. And if our parents have really terrible coping mechanisms, then that gets passed down to us. So now you were born this empathetic being. You were born this person who can take in more sensory material than maybe the average person. And you maybe perhaps have parents who have maybe poor coping mechanisms, or perhaps they have high expectations, or perhaps they have a learning style that's based around maybe shame, or it's based around like pushing and making sure that they're trying to get the most from their children, right? And if you couple those two things together, I think what happens is you forge a diamond, right? So this pressure cooker happens to produce something really beautiful, which is a creative person. And that creative person, if they are somebody who really, really excels in that pressure, that sort of that forged capacity of that diamond, a lot of times they end up becoming either people who work in this particular industry, lighting, design, architecture. They work in places where they are really expressing their creativity in the biggest and sort of most visible way forward. But then you also get the people who are incredibly sensitive to everybody around them. So yes, they're making creative things and they're really expressive about what they're making, but they're also incredibly tuned into what other people are doing. And it's quiet and it's silent. So we are incredibly good with clients. I mean, it's because we can usually sense what they need. Like without even words, we can often energetically understand what they might want or what they might need. And because we are good at that energy field of taking on what other people need, then we are able to create something really beautiful. And so we're always wanted and we're always needed. And that continues to fuel us. That continues to feed us. Ooh, that's really exciting, right? I made something beautiful. And we continue this cycle of making, and it's beautiful. Where it's not beautiful is if you go back to that nature and nurture, is when we are squeezed like a diamond, we're constantly outputting and we're rarely putting something back in.
The analogy of being forged in a diamond is a curious one, right? Diamonds have what are very obviously known as imperfections, right? And those are classified. So no diamond is perfect either, but the brilliance of it is what shines through. Yet if you get, really down into it and you look at each facet of it, if you look to its inner core, there's something that's not perfect. You could argue the diamond knows where that is. As a human, we know where that quote imperfection is in us. Do we beat ourselves up knowing that, even though other people can't see it?
Yeah. And I would argue that people can see it. And I think that they see it much more than we are able to see it. I think that people see our imperfections like baubles, almost like Christmas tree ornaments. Like we think that we're hiding our imperfections. We think that we are hiding our worst parts of ourselves. And those are the things that actually are like on the most display to others. And so we often call that our shadow self. But I'm going to go back for just a second. Very briefly kind of described like what happens with our caretakers if they have, sort of poor coping mechanisms.
And like, what's an example of a poor coping mechanism?
Yeah. So a child doesn't know how to express themselves. They don't know how to regulate themselves. And so they're just at full scream, right? And they're expressing what they want. So at 3 or 4, that looks like a tantrum, right? Like I want the toy, or I want the food, or I want the snuggles, whatever that is. If the parent doesn't have the time or the capacity, or the capacity meaning like I don't have the capacity for just even the emotional space of this right now, and they don't have the capacity to regulate themselves, what ends up happening is they blow up. And so they either shout, or they put their kid in timeout, or they, tell the kid to go away. They punish the child. Children are supposed to be seen and not heard, that sort of thing. We see that a lot. You need to, I'm going to give you something to cry about. These are things that we hear.
While as a parent, you do love them, you're in that moment maybe not giving them what they would expect. And that's by your definition, a poor coping mechanism.
If you don't have the ability to regulate yourself when there's a stressor around, you tend to go towards poor coping mechanisms. And that's yelling, screaming, isolating, drugs, alcohol, sex, right? Like any sort of vice. And so you could say being a creative is a coping mechanism. And so being creative, often we live in our head. We tend to understand that, I'm going to go back to, that parent-child coping mechanism, right? Like the screaming, maybe there's like some tension there. When we don't know why our parents are yelling at us or why they're upset with us, that makes an imprint on our nervous system. And now we are meaning-making machines. Like this entire body is meant to do one of two things. It's like, I need to be safe, or am I unsafe? Safe or am I unsafe? And it's just constantly understanding, like, where am I at in this world? Am I safe or am I unsafe? And when it's safe, it feels calm, cool, chill, regulated. You're happy. You're able to like process the world. You're able to make things. You're able to have joy. You're able to make creative projects, right? And you feel good in your body. But when you are in unsafe space, what ends up happening is your body is on high alert for, what should I be doing? Should I be running away? Should I be fighting? Should I be freezing? Should I be doing something other than what I'm doing right now? When we have a parent that has those poor coping mechanisms and they're shouting at us, what we're learning in that moment is, okay, this is irritating to my parents, so I am going to stop this behavior so that they won't get mad at me, right? Because we are incredible at understanding the nuances around us and the energy around us. And we don't have, like I said, 0 to 7, we don't have logic. We are saying, okay, especially as children, when we often say, something is wrong with me. there's something wrong with my behaviors, or there's something wrong with who I am at my core. Now, these are like kind of those shadow selves that we talked about, like they're in the back of your head, but they're in your subconscious. But what ends up happening is you tend to change and morph and bend and act a different way than how you initially did, because what you're trying to do is that sun, that moon, and the stars, your parents, you want them to continue to show you love and affection and feed you and keep you safe and, keep you warm and keep you inside the house, right? Not kick you out of the clan. And in order to do that, you bend to their will. So if this is something that you continue to learn again and again and again and again as a small child, that you have to change, or you have to morph, or you have to become someone different in the presence of your parents, guess what? That carries on into your world, into your adulthood, into your relationships, into your business. Now, also, if this happens, what ends up happening is, as a creative person, you're already sensitive to those energies around you. You already have this ability to see the world in just like a slightly different way. And now you've got these experiences where you're being, again, forged like that diamond, and those little flaws are coming out. A lot of us feel uncomfortable in our bodies because we were told we were bad, or we were told, stop what you're doing. And we have a physical response, and it's uncomfortable to us. But because we don't have a parent to like walk us through that uncomfortable feeling, what we do is we dissociate and we cut ourselves off at the neck, and we start to live inside of our head. And a lot of times, especially when you talk to creative people, they say that they're anxious. They're anxious people, or they're worriers, or they're overthinkers, right? Only when I talk to people who are like true one-to-one artists, when I say like one-to-one artists, like they make for an audience of one, like they're just like Basquiat type, painters. Those are the people who have like freed themselves from the construct of like, what is somebody expect something from me. But when you tend to be in a more creative space where you are doing it for money, and you are doing it in the terms of like something maybe more technical in terms of design, right? And you're working with clients, every person I've ever worked with has had some level of anxiety, or overworking, or they're unable to set boundaries. They are completely working themselves into a pretzel to make sure that everybody else is happy and everybody else's needs are met, and that they are doing a really good job, and that they are seen as doing a really good job. Oh, you're such a good designer, or oh, you're such a good creative person, right? They need those accolades. And so those accolades continue to keep them inside their head, because that's the safe place to be.
So this whole notion of creativity, you mentioned people can certainly and are born with a way to see the world in a different way. Then there's your childhood, which nobody goes through a perfect childhood. Doesn't matter who you are. You'll always piss your parents off, right? Or, your parents' priorities will never 100% be aligned with what their child needs. And that's called being human, right? We all have our own faults. I think it's...
And that makes resilience, by the way.
100%. Yeah. I think it's hard to accept that sometimes, right? You always want to love your parents, and like you want to find the good in life always, especially with your upbringing. You certainly, well, I shouldn't say certainly, but at some point, there's an opportunity to own it, right? And a lot of people want to own what that was and say, no, like someone didn't cause that. But if you look at this narrative where you become this beautifully perfect but not perfect diamond, and you've had some experiences in your childhood, and it's all kind of, I won't call it a big snowball, but like it's a little snowball, right? You have this little snowball, and then you become a teenager, and then you move through that stage of life, and then you become a young adult, and you really start to exercise what you just said, which is finding the safe space, which is in your head, which is creativity. And next thing you know, the world says, oh, we need you. Like, newsflash, this is a fact, by the way, right? The world would not exist if creativity didn't exist, because we wouldn't evolve, we wouldn't survive. Something would be out there that was better or smarter or bigger or stronger than us. But the human mind is this beautiful, brilliant thing that's constantly creative. And even if you don't classify yourself as a quote creative, you're creative. Like, everybody learns how to solve problems. That's called getting creative, right? Some people like to solve problems in a non-structured way, but there's always that desire to be fresh, to be different, to be creative. And what it really is you being comfortable in your own safe space. Talk to me a little bit about, how we can look at ourselves as professionals today and what we need to understand about that safe space as part of who we are, so that we can then learn to manage it.
Yeah. I think you said it best. Creativity is problem solving, period. Right? It's not about putting colors together or being really technically accurate with, lumens or whatever it is, right? Like, creativity is problem solving. And whatever that problem is, whether it's like, what am I having for dinner tonight? And I've only got 20 minutes to make it, versus, I've got a big project and a presentation that I've got to get ready for my client, right? You're using problem solving skills. I would argue to say that creativity is not in your mind. I think creativity is in your body. I think creativity is whole. And so we've learned that our brain, and this is like the construct for like the last 150, 200 years, is that our brain is the most valuable thing and it runs the show. And it doesn't. So our nervous system is 80-20, and that means 80% of, imagine a four-way highway. 4 of those lanes on the highway are starting from your gut and they're moving up to your brain. But only 1 lane is going from your brain down to your gut. And what that means is we are actually taking in information in our body, right, through all of our senses, and then our mitochondria and like senses that we don't even know about, right, and our energy fields, etc. And we're taking all that information in, we're aggregating it, we're throwing it up to the brain. The brain goes through its Rolodex and says, I've had an experience like this before. This is how we should react, or this is how we should problem solve. And then it said, once it chooses, the magic card for how it's going to respond, it sends that information, the directive, back down to our body, right? So I think creativity starts in our body, and then our brain just knows how to copy paste. It knows how to use past experiences. It knows how to say, I've seen this before. And because we are meaning making machines and we are pattern makers, like the entire body is like, have I seen this pattern before? And can I glean some information from this? So the creative process, looking at those patterns, I think the beauty of a creative person is that they're like listening to their body, or they should be listening to their body. They're listening to their body. They're looking for the patterns, and then they're finding ways to change it or evolve it or swap it out for this particular unique, instance.
You mentioned there's 4 lanes that leave the gut, and 1 comes back from the brain. Where else do they go?
Let's just talk about like kind of the brainstem. The nervous system starts at the base of the neck, which is plugged into your limbic system, which is the complete emotional center of your body, right? Like, it doesn't speak logic. It doesn't speak words. It speaks feelings. And then from there, it branches down to both sides of your neck. And then it reconnects around kind of your heart, your chest. And then it connects to every single one of your organs, all the way down to your colon. And then it branches down into your legs and your arms, etc. But the bulk of it is in your torso. And so it's constantly getting information from your sight, smell, sounds, touch, feeling, right? And an enormous bundle of nerves is around your gut. And we call that the enteric nervous system. And that works on its own. And so when something is going good or bad, the enteric nervous system responds.
That's your gut feeling.
That's your gut feeling. And so if you are somebody who's like, oh, I listen to my gut, that means that that 4-lane highway is working really well. Like you don't have a lot of like detour signs and there's not a lot of cones and things up, right? Like things are working really well. But if you're somebody who's like, my gut feelings are off lately and like you don't trust your gut, it's because that connection somewhere between your brain and your body has been pruned a little bit. And we prune those. The brain naturally prunes nervous system roots whenever we don't use them. So if you're somebody who sits, for instance, and I'm going to say myself, I sat in a chair for 80 hours a week and I rarely moved. And so because of that, what ended up happening is my body pruned a lot of the neural networks that went to like my hands and my feet, and I became very clumsy. And you see that a lot, right? You see that with puppies. You see that with people who, like, I'm going to use my husband here. He's a developer, people who like work behind their screens for a long time. You think of them as sort of like gangly and a little bit uncomfortable and like they kind of trip and fall a lot, right? They bump into things. And it's just because their nervous system has said, hey, like, I'm not using that right now. I'm going to work for efficiency and I'm going to just highlight the things that I need.
Because that efficiency is all about like you're putting so much into your body in terms of energy and food every day. You're not constantly sitting there and eating. So it's like energy in, energy out. And your nervous system is using so much of this energy. When you look at the nervous system, I would just say like, I'm totally a creative person. So I'll pick on myself. Like, how do I know, oh, I'm making this decision out of a creative space or I'm making this decision out of the other part of me?
I don't think there's a difference.
There isn't. Okay.
No, I really don't think there's a difference because we're constantly taking in information, right? And we're adapting around it. I think there's something you said that was interesting, which is, I'm going to call it flow state, right? We're a creative person and we lock in. We lock into like a time or an event or just some problem that we're solving and it just feels easy, right? And we just get into this flow state. That is when your nervous system is relaxed, you're calm, you're cool, you're collected. You're in this thing that we call the window of tolerance. And that is where you are working optimally. Everything is like, all systems go, all systems online. And you're able to shut out the outside world, outside distractions, and you're just able to focus in on what feels good. And I would say energetically, as creative folk, we tend to be able to access flow state a little bit easier. Also, athletes tend to get into flow state a little bit easier. When you are able to do that again and again and again, you're reconnecting to your mind-body, right? So your mind and your body are not separate things. I call it the mind/body, mind-body. And so this idea that like, is creativity motivating me or is, something else motivating me? I don't think there's a difference.
What I'm actually probably trying to do is access it versus being stuck. And being stuck as a creative sucks. Like, I hate it. Every creative hates it. You feel uncomfortable. To your point, you've got this whole nervous system that's running your body. Your gut's off. You're not trusting of your decisions. So you can start to look around for validation in other places. But then you get into the flow state and everything's like, sweet, it's on fire. I want to take a quick break. I want to let this live with people's minds. I think we might just play some music for a couple minutes. Let people listen, let people digest and reflect on when the last time they were in the flow state is versus not. And then when we come back, I want to dive into how we have an ability to control that, or how we have an ability to influence that, or how we have an ability to simply manage our own creative mind, to create mental toughness, to exercise that mental fitness, to make sure that we are trending towards where we want to be and not away from where we want to be as a creative person. Does that sound good?
I love it.
This conversation is brought to you in partnership with Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale develops luminaires that deliver beyond the usual expectation of what they should do in healthcare environments. As an expert medical brand, they make lighting about people, not just spaces, about feeling well, not just treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's positive impact on people, you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, and you also want to share your thoughts about the future of lighting, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. This is all about managing creativity. And like, if you're not in a flow state, you're going to spend all day trying to get there, trying to be creative. And then you're going to finally get into that creativity, and it's going to be easy. But it's going to be 9:30 at night. And you have obligations outside of your creativity in your professional world. So how do we manage that problem? We've talked a lot about the theoretical nature, backed by research and studies and a whole bunch of other stuff. But like, practically speaking, when you look at a creative person, a creative mind, how do we naturally drift in and out of this flow state? And when we're out of it, how do we recognize that? How do we acknowledge that so that we can take the next step?
Well, let's talk about the word stuck. That's a word we hear. You've mentioned it a couple times. It's a word we hear like, I feel stuck, or like, I just kind of can't get out of my own way, or I feel like I've lost my groove, right? And so when we feel stuck, it's typically because we're not nourishing ourselves in a complete way. And I'm going to talk about like the 3 kinds of nourishment so that you can use these. These are tools for you to use on a daily basis. So am I being nourished with sleep? The body has to repair itself, and it needs a solid 7 hours to do that, right? Your brain shrinks at night. It gets this beautiful like wash, right? It goes through a rinse cycle. And then if you don't get that rinse cycle, and it takes 7 hours to do this, right? Brain shrinks 60%, you get a wash cycle, it rinses away any residue and salts and mineral deposits, and then goes back up to its normal size. If you do not get proper amount of sleep, that rinse cycle doesn't happen. The brain is sticky. It's literally gunked up with sort of leftover minerals and deposits and yada yada. So have we nourished our body with sleep? Have we nourished our body with good foods? So the brain takes up 60% of our calories, and the thing that it wants most is fat and minerals. That's what it operates on. So if you're stressed and you're constantly looking for the Lays, there's a reason for that, right? The brain is like, I need fat and I need salt in the quickest form possible. And it's like, Lays. Those are potato chips. Those are amazing. So good. So if you're somebody who craves salty and fat, it's probably because you are tired or your brain is doing a lot of computation and it just needs more calories. Okay, so feed yourself well. Go grab yourself some avocado toast, sprinkle some beautiful Himalayan salt on top of it. Or my favorite is that Furikami Japanese bento flakes. You know, they've got some seaweed, they've got some salt, they've got some fish in there. Wonderful. So are you feeding yourself well? You got enough calories, you got enough fat, you got enough protein, right? Got enough carbohydrates? Really important. Now, what's the other thing that we can feed ourselves with? And that's people. So often we isolate as creatives because we're like, I've got to figure this out myself. But as creatives, we need energy and we bounce off of other people's energy, right? And that reciprocation of energy helps to create more and better ideas. So even if you're not problem solving for your actual, flow state thing that you want to achieve, just having coffee with somebody, just being with somebody, talking about anything, your children or whatever activities are happening over the weekend, that bonding releases oxytocin. Oxytocin makes us feel good. That's the releases all those feel good chemicals. So if you feel stuck, maybe stop trying to keep pushing towards problem solving and just look inward and say like, have I fed myself well? Have I fed myself with sleep, with people, with food? And if you haven't, solve one of those problems. And now let's talk about actually feeling stuck from a nervous system point of view. So if you're having a hard time waking up in the morning, or you wake up and you're not refreshed, or you sit down at your desk ready to work and then suddenly you feel paralyzed and you're not able to move forward, most likely you're stuck in a nervous system state that is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And what happens is the body basically is in a state of paralysis, or it's in a state of emergency. And so we have to move our body out of that. We cannot be productive if we are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. What we have to do is be in a place of rest and digest. So getting up, standing up, and literally like shaking our body. And that just looks like bouncing a little bit. That looks like shaking your hands. That looks like moving your head, maybe doing some bends, some lifts, that sort of thing. And you're moving the energy through your body. And you're telling your body, hey, I'm safe. Yes, I might be a little bit like stressed out right now, but there's no lions, tigers, and bears behind my desk. Like nothing's going to jump out and get me. I'm right here. And we shake our body a little bit in order to remember, hey, things are chill. I'm just sitting at a desk. We can go forward. Now, what I like to do is, especially if you're in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and you are in that space of like, I'm trying to get unstuck, you're trying to freeze that, or you're trying to thaw out that freeze, we do something called Pomodoro timing. And that basically means, are you familiar with like when you cook, there's like these little Italian tomatoes and they're timers and they go for 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so you get yourself a Pomodoro timer. So you can set your watch for 20 minutes. You can get one of these tomatoes. I actually have the tomato because it's really fun to look at. And you set it for 20 minutes. You can do anything for 20 minutes. You can deep breathe for 20 minutes. You can answer emails for 20 minutes. You can do your taxes for 20 minutes. But if you tell your nervous system, especially if you're doing something really, really scary. So I'm going to actually go back to taxes for just a second. I hate taxes. I hate doing them. They terrify me. Numbers, am I doing it right? The whole thing. I always feel like I'm going to go to jail every single year, right? I'm like, I hire people to do them for me, but taxes somehow terrify me. And when it comes to taxes, I set my timer for 20 minutes and I'm like, I can do this for 20 minutes. And what ends up happening is I'm so afraid that I'm going to do it wrong. You put it off and put it off and put it off. And it just tends to like pile up and get worse. If you set a timer for 20 minutes and you say, I'm going to do this for 20 minutes and no longer, your nervous system says, I can handle 20 minutes. That's chill. Okay, I can do that. And then you do it. And then it turns out that no lions, tigers, or bears came out and they ate you. So you're actually safe and you're okay. And your brain says, I think I could go a little longer, actually. I could go another 5 minutes. I could go another 10 minutes. That's what typically helps us get back into flow state. So rarely do we sit down at our desk and say, I'm going to have flow state today. Like it's going to happen. No, we need to make sure that we have like fed our body, right? In the 3 ways that I shared. And then also we are working with our nervous system and saying, hey, I'm going to go in, what we do is we call triation. So have you ever seen a flower bloom?
Yeah.
You'll notice it opens and then it contracts. And then it opens and then it contracts. And then it opens and it contracts. For every open that it makes, it has to make a small contraction because opening takes a lot of energy. So it contracts a little bit, reserves its energy, and then it opens up bigger next time. And so by taking these like small steps, right, feeding ourselves well, connecting with people, making sure we're well slept, is that a word? That we've slept well, and that we're doing things in these little small chunks, like maybe 20 minutes. And you have to do what's right for you, right? Like you might say, Shawna, I need 10 minutes. Fine, do 10 minutes, right? 20 minutes is what works for me. By doing it in that small chunk, you can move out of your freeze or your stuckness, and then you can start to move into that relaxed. Once you're relaxed, that's when your body can say, I'm ready for that like flow state.
How do you check yourself? And I think this is important because as a creative person, if you feel like you're in flow state but you're not, it could take you like 4 or 5 times as long to get something done to your own level of creativity and satisfaction because you are so stuck in it. And time is precious and it's something we don't have enough of in this world, especially today. So, how can we stop ourselves? Once a day, once an hour, is there a cadence? Is there something we can put on our desks? What's a creative solution to checking in on being creative?
Yeah, I love that question. So my answer is somatics. Somatics mean of the body. So the word soma is a Greek word. It means of the body. And so somatics mean basically working with the body. And so I like to do, especially anyone I coach, we do somatics 4 times a day. And we do somatics when we first wake up, before we eat lunch, before we eat dinner, before we go to bed. And the reason why we're doing those 4 times a day, and there maybe takes 30 seconds, and it's that like bobbing up and down, that jumping up and down that I was telling you about, the shaking, just reconnecting with the body. You're not thinking about anything else. Just for 30 seconds, you're moving your body in a purposeful way. By doing it when you first wake up, you're basically waking up the body and saying, I'm ready for the day, right? You're moving your chi, you're moving your energy. Before lunch, the reason why we do it before lunch is because we tend to answer emails and do all the little niggly stuff, right? Like the time-intensive tasks before lunch. And sometimes in our email are not so pleasant things, or maybe we're making phone calls that we don't want to make. And we put ourselves back into that fight or flight, right? That sort of like energy crisis state. Before we eat, we want to be in rest and digest. We want to be relaxed so we can actually have that belly back online, right? That enteric nervous system that we talked about. We want to make sure that our digestion is back online so that we can actually absorb our nutrients when we're eating. That's the reason why we do it before dinner time also, because between lunch and dinner time, a bunch of stuff stacks up. So get ourselves back into the space. And then just before dinner, just before bedtime, because we actually want to have a really great night's sleep. We can sleep stressed. You can sleep stressed for decades. And so if you're somebody who wakes up a lot in the middle of the night, if you go pee a lot, if you are somebody who says, I don't need to sleep very much, or I'm an insomniac, these are all signs that you are in an incredibly stressed state. You're stuck in fight or flight, and you really need these somatic tools to try and calm your body to get back to baseline. So the second part of your question is, how do I recognize, or what can I do for myself? So not only is it somatics 4 times a day, but it's checking in with yourself. How do I feel about this particular situation or this thing that I'm doing? And where do I feel it? So a lot of times we're like, how do I feel about it? And we stay in our head. I feel angry about it, or feel, happy about it, but we're actually just saying a word. We're not feeling the feeling. And it's because we've learned to stay in our head. So how do I feel about this? Where do I feel it? And so a lot of times I'll do a little body scan. It takes 30 seconds. And I'm like, I feel that in my hips, or I feel that in my knees, or I feel that often in my shoulders. And those are clues to us, like, does it feel good or does it feel bad? So if I'm trying to do something and I'm pushing and I'm like, okay, I need to check in with myself. Where do I feel this? If it's on my shoulders, it might feel like a burden. Weight of the world on my shoulders, right? If it's in my hips, our hips are our emotional junk drawer. That's where we hold a lot of repressed anger and emotions. And so if I'm feeling it in my hips, I might be angry about it. If I'm feeling it from like my hips down to my feet, that is our safety. That is like rock bottom. Like, when you're standing straight up and down, your legs are the things that are the most stable. Like that you're like, if you're looking at a tripod, that's the stability. Or you're looking at a table, the legs are the stability. Your legs are your stable part. And so if you're feeling into your body and you're like, wow, feeling my legs and they feel heavy, or they feel achy, or they feel uncomfortable, right? Where in my body am I lacking some safety? So by feeling into our body and sensations into our body, it gives us some clues as to maybe what's keeping us stuck, or maybe what's occupying our brain enough to where it's like spinning plates. Have you ever seen those guys, like where they're like the magicians who are like spinning 100 plates? At some point they've got like one over here and it's super wobbly, and they're like, I gotta go over there and they gotta spin it. If we're constantly keeping so many things in our brain, if we ever just sit down and like release it and say, I just need to not think about this for a minute, it feels really terrifying, because we feel like one of those plates is going to fall. And so as creative people, if those plates are spinning in the back of our mind, they're keeping us from flow state, right? They're keeping us from like entering the groove. A lot of times what I tell people to do is grab a journal and brain dump. You just literally brain dump, like vomit onto the page, every worry that, and it's everything from like global warming down to, did I pay that parking ticket? I mean, it's everything that is occupying space in your brain. And then you take a highlighter or you just underline the things that are actually really important to you. And sometimes just by releasing it onto a page and just letting it sit somewhere, so it's not forgotten, but it's just sitting somewhere, that can help our brain and our body say, okay, I can like take a breath because I don't have to remember that thing right now.
Literally clear your nervous system.
Yes.
Let the energy flow through your body.
Yes.
And go back to your gut.
Yes. You've solved the problem. It's right there.
This is fascinating. Like the brain in mental health is huge right now, right? And being in our own heads and having to deal with everything it's a challenge. With the desire to just constantly, want to create and never stop, but getting stuck. If you get to the point where you're like doing this stuff and you're unstuck and you're creating and everything else, are you safe in that flow state? Like, will you then make the time for everything else, or can you get stuck in the flow state?
I don't know if you can get stuck in the flow state. Everything has a season, right? Like we are experiencing fall at the moment, and every tree has to, well, not every tree, but trees are going through this metamorphosis where they are conserving their energy, right? So we get to visually see that all of the leaves are changing colors because all the energy is literally being sucked from those leaves and being put down into the root system. And it's shutting down basically, right? From the tippy tops, and then it's going dormant. Everything has a season. And so we can't be in flow state 24/7. It's impossible. And we can't be outputting all the time. It's impossible. And so we have these expectations, especially with a consumeristic and a capitalistic society, that everything should look like a hockey stick. Everything should be going up all the damn time. And this is actually what's getting us into trouble as humans, is like, it's impossible, because that's not flow state and that's not nature, and it's not how the universe works. The universe works with this like expansion and contraction, and we have to honor that. And when we don't honor that, that's when we start to bleed out. That's when we start to feel the pressures of stress. That's when we start to feel that burnout, like, oh. And burnout is sneaky because it kind of starts like, everybody's a little bit of an asshole, or like, nobody does anything for me, or, I seem to have to do everything by myself, right? And then, so what we start to do is we start to isolate. And then we start to like, not just isolate, but protect. And then we start to do more because we're like, well, everybody's an idiot and they're going to do it wrong. I'm going to do more myself, right? And so burnout becomes this self-consuming and sort of like almost construct of our own selves, because we're trying to control an outcome. And the outcome we're trying to control is perfection. And there's no such thing. So wanting to be in flow state all the time, there's just no such thing.
The outcome we're trying to control is the energy our body is going to receive, whether we like it or not. And it's impossible to control the entire world around you. It's impossible to predict what energy is going to show up in the room, even if you're in your own house.
Totally.
Right? If there's another human in there, they're bringing energy into the room.
They're bringing energy in.
You don't know what it's going to be.
Totally.
Burnout happens maybe to creative people more often than not, because
no, that's true.
Because you're in that flow state, or you're not in that flow state, and that flow state relies on the energy around you, and then you think you control it, and hey, you actually may have at one certain point in time, but actually what you might not know is, while you think you controlled it, you got lucky because the energy you wanted is what showed up, and you convinced yourself that you created that. Now, there's a whole different conversation here around like, behavioral presence, and like, you as humans, we can do things to influence people, and like maybe that can affect the energy, and if you're in the right mentality, blah, 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 blah. But I want to put a nice round heart-shaped period on this conversation. Like, That's that, right? When you think of your creativity, when you think of what that means for you, understand where it comes from, understand that it is a beautiful thing and it will do so much for you, but also understand, what the Achilles heel of it is and how to get yourself out of it and back to where you want to be as fast as possible. Shawna, thank you. Thank you for shedding a little bit of light on this today. Thank you for giving us a way to think about who we are as design professionals and creative people. If people want to get in touch with you, if they have curiosities or questions, obviously I know you have an app, so that's a pretty good place to go to dive into this a little bit more. How can people get in touch with you, or what other resources might you offer up that are good and accessible besides Googling, "This is my problem"?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So we have an app, it's called Your Daily, and it's a nervous system health coach. And so you can download that. It's on Google and on Apple Play stores. And then you can find us on Instagram at yourdaily.reset. There's always me or somebody else on the other end of the DMs. So ask your questions and we'll reach out to you directly. And in terms of resources, we've got a really cool tool that I think you might enjoy, which is, how does your personality affect your wellness? And so it's a quiz to understand your own personality and the traits that you take on and how that might affect your digestion or your sleep or, how you perform with other people. And we give you tips and tricks on how to either optimize for that or maybe avoid some of your pitfalls.
And also I might just offer, if this is a conversation you've enjoyed today, and you do identify yourself as creative and you're in design, share it with someone. It's very possible that not everybody might think about it the way you do, but this may help us all be more beautiful, passionate, creative, and successful designers. Shawna, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Sam. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Light Pod. In case you didn't know, this entire episode was actually also produced with a video attached to it. So make sure wherever you listen to this, you think about watching it next time. It's amazing the connection you'll have when you not only listen, but you watch the brilliant minds who join us to celebrate the people, the process, and the product behind design. Until the next episode, stay brilliant, be bold, and never let your inspiration go. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.